Here we go. Our first Fresh Air podcast recording live test. Gonna see how shit goes today. But before we go live, it's time for a little mix first.
step out of them war and them brutality. Power to life, power to reality. Every day vitality becoming a normality. Power to life, power to reality. Ready to go fight for national morality. Power to life, power to reality. Holy Babylon and them shoot who kill quality. What a moment to stop and they can't resist continuity. Want a better life and never sign no opportunity. Babylon they talk about and look like you know you. Never let them know foolishness. Look and you will see the world is not them really this movie. War and petty rivalry are that them want to use it. See when they get what they try to conquer and strategy. Never let them trick you, never let them tell you who to be. Power to life, power to reality. Power to step out of them war and them brutality. Power to life, power to reality. Every day vitality becoming a normality. Power to life, power to reality. Ready to go fight up for national morality. Power to life, power to reality. Only them a pile up and a smile up while you suffer. Them not give a stuff about them youth up and the gutter. Them inside the war and now them help like a utter war. Most them inna them yard a lot angry and full of stutter. Get a life expectancy much shorter than the average. Poorest set of people them a starter like a savage. Baby father dead up, baby mother a go manage. They kill the innocent and take a lateral damage. They kill the innocent and take a lateral damage. Yes. And reason with the boss, because the truth never try to hide, never try to master. While the innocent are dead in the crossfire, and mama balling out somebody do something. The killer son in front of her, she couldn't do nothing. And every day is like they kill another few dozen. Yo, this a bag of genocide, it's not a nuisance. Oh, me say power to life, power to reality. Power make we step out and them war and them brutality. Power to life, power to reality. Every day vitality becoming a normality. Power to life, power to reality. Power make we step out and them war and them brutality. Power to life, power to reality. Every day vitality becoming a normality. Power to life, power to reality. Don't be that this and the insanity. Power to life, power to reality. After fire. Fire.
joining us, guys. Guys, right, so this is our first fresh air live multi-stream. So if this is your first time seeing or hearing about us, we are the Fresh Air podcast that you might find on Answers in Reason. So I'm Joe. Oh, we can't hear you, Dave. Hang on.
Fucking Dave.
Have you done the USB port, Dave?
Okay, how about now?
I can hear you now, Dave. All right.
Okay.
Quick sound check, everybody, but then we'll do the hello again. Andy, are you there? Andy, you're on mute. Yep, you're still on mute.
As he should
Well,
be.
there's no need to mock his disability.
No, Andy, are you there, dude? Let me get... Andy. No, I can see that you're trying.
Now?
Yeah, there you are. Right.
Right button for push to talk, shall I?
Okay. Yeah, feel free to turn push to talk off for the purpose of this podcast. Completely up to you, dude. Chris, I know we heard you earlier, but are you still there?
Hola.
Yeah, and Martine.
Dick and balls, dingleberry, dingleberry, dingleberry.
I'll take that as a yes.
Yeah, sorry I was late. I was a little bit busy. Yeah.
Switching it up, were we?
Indeed.
Awesome. Right. So, let's start again then. Hello and welcome to Fresh Air. I'm Joe.
I'm Dave.
I am Martijn.
I'm Chris.
Nah, jokes. I'm Andy.
So, for any of you who are tuning into us for the first time, the Fresh Air podcast is something that we've been doing for just over a year now. Probably about a year and a month, I think. And it was a weekly podcast. We've done 2 seasons and we're actually halfway through recording the 3rd season. But we figured we'd give a go at doing a live stream. So that is basically the start of it. There is something that I realise that I need to do, and is put the chat overlay on the screen. So, Martijn, tonight is basically your episode. Whilst I sort out that thing on the stream, why don't you give us a brief introduction in tonight's episode, which is on power?
Well, as you said, it's on power. That's, I hope you got shit done by then.
And what is power?
Well,
while
discussing power, we're going to basically discuss 3 different things about power, which is the definition of power, whether and if so, how we can measure power. And then I have basically two different distinctions we can make when it comes to forms of power. So, well, of course, power is mostly in this case because, well, that's my thing, discussed in a political sense. It will also be, well, applicable in social structures and any kind of other interaction we have with other people. So when we're actually discussing power, we tend to look first at the definition Thomas Hobbes gave, which I have aptly written down. It is the power of a man is just his current means to obtain a future good. He distinguishes this from authority, which he defines as the right of doing any action. So this basically distinguishes well, power from authority, making authority normative and power descriptive.
So power is only applicable to something that is good. You can't have power to do bad, according to that. No?
Well, no. When when Thomas Hobbes speaks of goods in this sense, he basically means whatsoever is the object of current appetite or desire. So it's not normative, nor is it prescriptive.
Cool.
All right. Well, what we should note also about power is that it's, as they call, non-transitive, which means that if we consider three persons, person A, person B, and person C,
Mm-hmm.
while person A might be more powerful than person B, and B in turn might be more powerful than person C might still be more powerful than person A. We could look at this, for instance, when we look at a government. There's like the legislature, there's the courts, and there's law enforcement. So while the legislature itself may be more powerful than the law enforcement, and the law enforcement more powerful than the courts, or vice versa, they might actually overrule each other in specific cases. So that also means that power is very context related, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, one way that you could say that is a teacher may have authority over a child in the school environment, but the second they're outside of that school environment, they have no real authority over that person.
Yeah, the power though,
Yeah. Well.
because we're distinguishing power from authority, right? So, what's also very cool about having authority and power is that when you have both, authority enriches power, right? So, when I demand you do something, and you think I have the right to demand you do something, you will more readily do it than when I just force you using, well, brute force, right?
Right. So, I mean, you mentioned. Sorry, I was trying to sort out the chat overlay thing, which I now think I've sorted, which is coming up. So you mentioned the different types of sort of power. Can we go into that a little bit?
Well, the different types of power, that's a whole different thing than what I mentioned, but we can basically get into that if you want. Um, let's see. We basically distinguish. We can make two distinguish. There's two. Damn. We can distinguish
Have another drink,
twice
Martin.
when it comes to forms of power, right? So there's basically four forms of power that we can discuss.
Right.
Which is
Go.
one is the collective or cooperative power,
Mm-hmm.
and that is contrasted against, let's see, power over or power to. So when it comes to collective or cooperative power, That's basically when, well, like we're doing now, right? We're collectively using our power to make this podcast.
Right.
And we are doing that in such a way that we uh, are producing something that we would otherwise not produce.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have collective power, it's people getting together to achieve goals they would otherwise not be able to achieve.
Yeah, that's fair.
All right. Well, there are some interesting debates that are had here. I've written two of them down. The first is what they call the blame fallacy,
Mm-hmm.
which arrives from the idea that power is a zero-sum game, right? So we assume that, for instance, if we get together and we try to change something in our world, like well, what a few of you guys have been doing, trying to get together and changing the terminology atheists use, right?
I wouldn't say we've
Some
been
people
trying to
would then
change it.
think that if that doesn't really work out for you guys, that there's actually somebody like, say, for instance, Aaron Ra, stopping you from achieving that goal. While it might simply be the case that there's insurmountable factors that make it impossible for you to actually achieve that goal.
Now, in this instance, would you say he had more authority, more power, or both?
Well, in this instance, at the well, both, because he is perceived more as an authority,
Yep.
and because when it comes to power, that's something we haven't really gotten into, but he has more current means, as Hobbes would say, to enact his will upon the world.
He's got a big influence over people, hasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, is
Yeah,
this like our podcast that we did on legitimacy? It's that perceived power,
yeah, exactly.
even though he might
And
not act.
also,
Sorry, carry on,
he
Chris.
is. Sorry, I was going to say that also he is using his power to continue what is the norm, whereas we'd be using our lesser power to try and change what people perceive as the norm. So we'd have a bigger task to achieve in the first place, which with less power is going to be far more difficult.
Yeah, I mean, if we were genuinely trying to change what was the norm, we're not trying to change anything. We're trying to prevent prescriptivism over a colloquial definition, and really absurd things like rocks are atheists. But to be honest, I'm really, really tired of that conversation. So if we can move past that, that'd be fantastic.
We'll try. We'll try. I can't promise anything. Okay, so then we have power over and power two.
Mm-hmm.
Power over and power two are often considered to be at odds with each other, right? So some people might think that if you have power over, you don't have power two, or that you have both at the same time.
Right.
Um, well, actually, basically, power over and power two, uh, well, they can be both the same thing, but they aren't necessarily. So, if I have money to buy something from you, I have the power to buy it. But if I have that same money and I can pay you to buy it for me, for instance, then I also have the power over you. But those are two distinctly different things, because if you want to refuse to buy something for me, I don't have the power over you, but I do have the power to buy it myself.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, well, so that's basically different forms of power. We should though go back a bit and work to investigate what Hobbes has said, and also what Arendt says about power, because that is an interesting distinction.
Okay, yeah, definitely. Sorry for jumping ahead there. It was, I was distracted by trying to sort out a problem on our first live test of getting us all on board, which is a bit different to what we've been doing with the SciPhi broadcasts. So I do apologise for that.
Yeah, no, there's no problem. That was actually the hardest part, and I didn't really get any objections. And I think I did a pretty good job, so yay me, right? Okay, so anyway, well, when Hobbes describes power in this way, it does become a fairly big definition, right? Because current means to obtain a future good. That does mean that, for instance, if I want to have sex with a nice girl and I'm beautiful, which I'm not, but I'm lacking power in that regard. But being smart will also help me to, obtain a future good, as in a good job or something along those lines. Um, Being evil or depraved would also give me power in the sense that I can hurt people along the way up the corporate ladder, for instance. So we would get a fairly broad definition.
So on
And
those, when you're saying like being evil, that would maybe be the power to do nefarious things, whereas wealth could be the power of having money, but also the power to spend a lot of money as well. It's sort of two types of power there with that. And
yeah,
beauty is maybe just the power of being attractive.
yeah, exactly.
But that does
Um,
give you the power to do other things.
Of course it can. It can open doors as well. So the power of can give power to. Would you say that, Martin?
um, yeah, I guess I would. I
But
guess
not
I would.
necessarily
Yeah.
always, but it can do.
Yeah, but when we get back to the other powers, I don't think that, for instance, power over can lead to power two, but I do think that power two can lead to power over.
Right? Yeah.
So, right, like the money example, the power to spend a lot of money can give me power over you, but power over you doesn't necessarily translate to having power to.
Spend a
Even
lot of
though I
money.
do think it does actually, now that I'm saying it out loud.
It's
Because
almost
that's
like
actually
it's a
what.
nuanced topic.
What did you
It's
say?
I said it's almost like it's quite a nuanced topic where all this stuff is sort of interlinked, and even though it's all separate, it's also a lot of it is crossover.
Yeah, that's the funny part, right? We don't. There's not a real big difference of opinion of what the definition of power should be.
Mm-hmm.
We'll get to that later, but there's a lot of discussion about how power is used, how it should be used, but also whether or not we can measure it, and well, and the forms of power that we just discussed. There's a lot of discussion there as well. So it is an interesting topic, even though broadly we can be in agreement. And most people are in agreement that Hobbes has made a critical oversight in his definition, which is that when he says the current means to obtain a future good, he's actually referring to basis of power rather than power itself. So it would have been better for him to say something along the lines of, well, what Frank Lovett says. Frank Lovett says the power of a person or group, in most general sense, is their ability, as given by particular means in a particular context, to bring about, if desired, future states of the world. Which it is. It sounds a lot more fancy, but it's basically just saying, well, you should be able to obtain it if you want it, and we should actually look at our collective abilities in a particular context. So it's really not so much extra fancy as it sounds, right?
Yeah, that's fair.
Not entirely sure I follow the difference between that and what Hobbes says.
Okay, so Hobbes says the power of a man is just his current means to obtain a future good. Right? It leaves out the context part. It leaves out the fact that power is context dependent. So
yeah, I
that's
get
why
that.
he says, yeah. All right, cool. Um, well, as I said, Arendt disagrees a bit, but at the same time, she sort of agrees as well. She says that power originates. What? I'll just fucking take the quote here. Wait. Um, Power corresponds to the human ability not just to act, but to act in concert. Power is never the property of an individual. It belongs to a group and remains in existence only so long as the group keeps together. This is a quote from her book on violence in 1969, I believe. And we can basically blame her disagreement on the fact that it's more of a political book than the context of the other definitions that we've spoken of. Um,
That's
basically,
why it particularly mentions group as opposed to an individual, because it's addressing political power as opposed to
yeah,
power in a more broad concept. Cool.
yeah. She also has a similar definition of power as we've used thus far, but she calls that strength
Right.
because that applies to an individual.
There's strength in numbers, though, so doesn't that sort of contradict that?
I missed the first part of your sentence. Can you?
There's strength in numbers, so doesn't that also apply to a collective as well? Or are you saying the context she was using strength was just that of an individual?
Yeah, the context that she actually emphasizes the fact that strength is something that belongs to an individual, and she does say that that is the influence any individual person can express.
So is that
So,
strength
with
as a broad description or strength as a characteristic of particular things? So would you describe a person as being strong, or in that context, is it more along the lines of that person has a high strength of character?
I think both, but I would really have to grab the book for a minute if you really want a very detailed account of it.
I'll take your word
So
that it applies to both.
so yeah, that's basically how various people define power. Uh, that basically comes down to, if you ask me anyway, the Frank Lovett quote. I think that's the best thus far. In different contexts, people will define it a little bit differently, but it always has the the factors that we've spoken about in it, right? So
I mean, to give it a really basic thing, it's just the ability to do something or control something, which again is doing something. Obviously, there's far more to it than that, but if you were to give it a really basic thing, it's your ability to do something.
yeah, really basic. It is, yeah. As
I,
opposed then to, of course, authority, which is uh the ability of being perceived as having a right to do something.
Yeah. Obviously, it's far more interesting going into these really in-depth definitions that people have, but at the end of the day, there is also a simplistic way of just sort of describing them as well that perhaps can help people go, right, well, this is basically what it is, but actually there's more to it than that.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. So, I mean,
Okay.
you mentioned that it's from her book on violence. So, does she have some particular link to power and violence throughout it? I haven't read the work myself, so does she almost?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, she says that power basically arises from our ability to act in concert, right? And that also means the ability for a sovereign, for instance, uh, like a Donald Trump, to send Homeland Security officers into Portland and start kidnapping people. That is, but that would then be called using force as opposed to, using power.
So would you draw a line between force and power there? Is force not a
Um,
kind of power in a way? If you can force someone to do
Force,
something, isn't it power over?
uh, yes, it is, but at the same time, it can also detract from your power.
Right. How
So
so?
using excessive force will, for instance, reduce your authority, and authority, as being perceived as having the right to do something, is actually a form of power. So if you undermine your own authority, you're basically undermining your own power.
And I suppose that again links back to the whole legitimacy thing that we were talking about in the last season of the podcast as well, where you've got your factual legitimacy and your perceived legitimacy, and if you're undermining your power, you're sort of undermining your own legitimacy, and that can then also cause people to rise up and maybe fight back.
Yeah, as we're seeing in Portland, of course. Violence
So
begets violence, right?
in that way, then it wouldn't be that force and power are the same kind of thing. It's that force is a tool used in the demonstration of power, but one that has an immediate gain, but potentially a long-term detriment.
Yeah, force is basically the same as beauty, in that it is a base of power. It's a way you can exercise your power, and therefore, you know, it is
Yeah, but
not
isn't
power,
power in and of
but
itself.
yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, very interesting. Um, so with as we're saying there, the power is being undermined by the use of force in Portland, and therefore violence is begetting violence. Um, has the power been completely undermined in that, or is there still that original power there? It's just being fought against.
Yeah, that's a very good question. That goes back to the idea of legitimacy, where you also get the question like, how much of your authority do you lose until you lose your power?
Mm-hmm.
Um, of course, the government still has excessive amounts of power left. It wouldn't be the first time, for instance, that they would use less than acceptable means for crowd control in the United States. So yeah, they can still do that. Let's hope to God they don't. But right. Um. But yeah, that's actually a very good question, and
I
I
suppose it
think
depends as well. Sorry, in a democratic society, the overuse of force, in the opinion of one group, may be exactly the right amount of force in the opinion of the group that you represent. So using that doesn't necessarily undermine your power because you're still speaking to the same core group who got you there in the first place.
Yeah, I suppose if
yeah.
there's people who are supporting the government and supporting the violence that, say, the police might use against people, regardless of what they've done, it won't necessarily undermine the legitimacy to them, so they won't necessarily lose that voting power. However, there might be more people who then rally against them and find them more problematic because there might be people who are a little bit more on the fence. So the people who are die hard, you can do no wrong to my party, whatever that party might be, whether they're left, right, centrist, or whatever. If you're that die hard fanboy, nothing that they can do will necessarily undermine it. But there are people who are elsewhere that might have been, well, you seem reasonable. Oh, wait, no, you're really not. You're going over the top. So, yeah, I see what you say, Chris. It can go many ways, can't it?
Yeah, definitely.
That also depends on kind of the context and what's happening. Like certain actions will totally put a group of people off a party, and it depends how far they kind of push it as to whether they want to or whether they feel that they need to change their option.
Yeah, sure. I mean, even if you were a die-hard fan, and if everybody in this country was a die-hard fan of a particular party, and then they decided to bring back something like capital punishment for absolutely any crime, then and people might be like, "Whoa, that's going too far." Yeah, of course, as you say, it depends on context.
There'll
Which
still be
is-
the diehards though that want that.
Well, it depends. Say everybody didn't agree with it, then if no one in the country agreed with that sort of thing, and the government tried to do that sort of thing, then yeah, and then that goes back to Martin's original thing that he was saying about the context of the power.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. So the other thing that you mentioned was measuring power.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm trying to think of different ways that you can do it. When it comes to strength as a form of power, there's obvious ways that we can measure that for, say, an individual. For a political party, I suppose you can measure that a bit in the votes that they get. Would you regard that as a measurement of their power, them being voted in, or would that be a measurement of their authority, or a bit of both?
Well, that's the fun thing. It was basically a trick header, right? You can't measure power. You simply can't. The only thing that you can measure is the basis of power.
Right.
So that makes sense, right? I mean, when we're asking like how powerful is the United States, we go like, well, what's their arsenal? How many people do they have in the service? How quickly can I expect a nuclear warhead to land upon my village, etc., etc.
Right.
That's basically what you do.
Yep.
Now there are two general ways in which people have postulated we can do this. One is proposed by a guy named Robert A. Dahl, who says basically P minus Q equals M, where M equals power, P equals the probability of a state of affairs coming about when a person or group actively seeks to bring it about, and Q is the probability of that same state of affairs coming about without that group trying to actively bring it about.
I mean, this would be really
Um,
useful if before doing this test I've done some prep and I could make that suddenly appear on screen for everyone, including myself, to read. Because that would probably make a hell of a lot more sense to people if they could actually see that.
It would
Yeah.
make more sense to me.
yeah,
if I
you
was
can't
trying
read
to
that
come
for
up with a
shit.
joke.
No. Anyway, it comes down to basically power is the decisiveness that somebody has in bringing about a preferred state of affairs. The problem here is exactly what I said, that you're measuring decisiveness, and decisiveness doesn't necessarily equal power. So, for instance, I am not particularly powerful, but through luck, I might inspire someone out there to, I don't know, read some political philosophy, right? But in by same virtue, if you're going to work, for instance, your boss might be powerful enough to force you to do your work. However, they will not have to force you to do your work because you might prefer to do your work. That means that your boss is not decisive in bringing about the state of affairs that they want, but they are nonetheless more powerful than you are.
I
And
was
they
going to
have more
raise
authority.
bosses.
Sorry, go on, Chris.
I was going to raise bosses a few minutes ago when you were talking about the trouble of measuring power, as on an individual level like that, it gets even more complicated when you have to consider who they're having power over. Boss might be speaking to person A and tell them to do something and they do it because the boss said so, but says to person B to do it and they don't because they're a stubborn fucker. So the boss has a different level of power to different people.
And at the same time has the same level of authority, though, because he is all of their boss. But
Well, no,
no,
no. But if someone refuses to do it, then the boss will still have the same amount of power, basically, minus the lack of authority. Because if someone refuses to do what they're being told and another actively does what they are told, then obviously one of them thinks that the boss has more of a right to tell them what to do
right, okay.
than the other.
I'm
Yeah.
clearly still conflating these in my mind. Then, it'll
Okay. So let's take it like this, right? What is the difference between a police officer and a security guard?
uh, well, there's training and the ability to arrest you.
About 15 grand.
Yeah, the uniform, in certain places, the gun.
Right.
I mean, I'm
Right.
being silly here, but give me the answer that you want.
No. Well, fairly simple. Which one of the two will you listen to more easily?
Oh, well, that's a tough question. Depends how pretty they are. It doesn't, obviously. You're right. Yeah, you'd listen to a police officer more, but then for me, that's because of the greater risk that they pose to me, which would
Which means you respect them more, right?
no, not necessarily. I wouldn't necessarily.
Theism.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you said it spot on. There's people often conflate fear and respect. I suppose you could get a form of respect through fear, but if either one of them was a decent person and was like, "Listen, mate, I'm really sorry," and was really polite, I would have that sort of respect. Anyone comes down really like, "You can't do that," rah, 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 I wouldn't necessarily have respect for them. But if they were a police officer, I'd be like, shit, they could throw me in jail, or they could fine me, or they could do this, or they could do that. Therefore, out of fear, paranoia, whatever, there'd be more chance that I would do what a police officer said than a security guard that at best will call the police and get them to do something. You know?
Okay. Right. Well, then I'm just gonna be the dick. I
Well, hey.
respect police officers more. Um, partially because of the threat of violence that is implicit in their presence, but right, that's more of a force thing, right? Uh, that being said, police officers, like you said, have, for instance, more training, etc. Aside from that, I think security guards are bitter ass motherfucking dicks, and I simply don't respect them. I don't like none of it. Anyway, that means that a police officer has more authority over me because I think they have more right to tell me what to do than a security guard. Because in comparison to the security officer, the police officer has at least a marginal understanding of the law.
Right. Um. Yeah. I see. I think that we're almost talking past each other there as well, because there's a difference between respect for the job and respect for the person. Um, so I try not to tar.
No, there isn't. Not when they're in function.
Yeah, but I try not to tar everyone with the same sort of brush. Like, I wouldn't necessarily say all police officers or all security guards are dicks. I wouldn't like to say that
Yeah, they are.
personally. Yeah, but I wouldn't necessarily say that because I think with every job, every type of person, you get people on all sides. We seem to have lost
No, if
Dave.
you are prepared to give somebody a ticket while not completely or not sufficiently understanding the law, you are a dick.
Yes,
So
but that's
Same
not
goes in
everyone.
police
certain
officer
in
arrest
certain
you.
circumstances for police officers, but it goes a lot more for security officers, and they are dicks.
Yeah.
I
Have
mean,
you
I
been
suppose it
caught
depends
out by?
partly where you're from as well.
Have you been caught out by security guards this week, mine?
No, but I have stood next to a few of them, and they find it necessary to talk about people who sit in the tram next to them as civilians. I am sorry, but when you are educated the way security guards are educated, you do not get to call me a civilian.
You're
No,
just
I
a
would.
civilian in a costume.
Exactly.
uh,
That actually reminds me of a Michelin Web skit. Have you? I don't know if you've seen it about the police officer and the community support officer walking side by side. If you haven't seen it, I'm not gonna butcher it, but Google it and watch it. It is hilarious.
I don't remember that
Please
one.
put that in the chat.
I will do.
yeah. Yeah. Dave's right. The video has actually frozen on YouTube. I don't know why. I just hope the fact that this is going out other places that it hasn't. I mean, from my end, I can see that it's going a little bit jerky. I don't know if I'm coming through a little bit latent to you guys. It could just be that.
You're always jerky.
No, I'm always a jerk. There's a difference. um, just quickly checking out on a couple of other bits. Sorry, this has distracted me. Let's have a look on Facebook. No, I don't want you to send to the fucking lounge. It's insisting on sending to the lounge, and there's no way to undo that. Right, great. Okay, I can't test the Facebook stream to know if it's doing the same thing. So I apologize anyone out there that's watching and the video has frozen. It looks like this is going to be just like one of our podcasts anyway, where you can't see what the fuck we're saying or doing anyway. Oh, you responded on the Facebook one, Andy. Yeah, that's come up on the stream for me, but obviously the video's frozen.
That's
for
the
everyone
video
else.
that I was referring to, the Michelin Web video.
I wonder if that's clickable for everybody. No, it's not, but I can click on it. Maybe we'll throw that in. I'm sorry, I got completely distracted by the fact that the stream has seemed to have frozen elsewhere. I don't know why. It seems to be running my computer processors at 55%, so it's not exactly taxing itself too hard. There's no dropped frames or anything like that. I have no clue why. Maybe if I quickly do 876 and come back, maybe it will come back. I do apologize for
Have you
anyone
tried
out there.
turning it off and turn it on again?
Well, that's basically what I did by switching away from the scene that we're currently in and going back to it. But if it isn't working, well, I do apologize for anyone that's watching and we're just standing there frozen. That's not how it's supposed to look. However, the people who are watching, if you could respond in your chat and let us know that if it's frozen for you as well, and what you're watching on currently, it would be quite nice. Oh, I can see us on what do you call it?
I reckon YouTube froze us because of the rude sign.
What rude sign?
Don't know. Not got a clue what you're talking about, man. Nothing behind me.
You look backwards to me, so I can't read it. What rude sign? Bring it up. Joe sucks donkey dick, but that is backwards. Is that backwards to all of you guys as well?
Yep.
It is, yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so it looks like the stream, even on Twitter, is a bit frozen. I don't know what's going on.
It's not frozen, it's just lagging. It
Ah.
it keeps flashing every frame or so.
Okay, well, I mean, it's doing what it's doing. We'll carry on as we were. It's one of those things. It's one of those things. We're doing a live broadcast. I don't know what could be causing that. It's the first time it's happened to us. It hasn't happened in any of our other streams that we've done. And hopefully in the final recording, it won't actually do it. When I get a chance to put the video together and do the video editor, I'll have a look through and make sure it isn't. We're about an hour in, so a half an hour of the actual bit. So yeah, cool. All right. So sorry guys. To get us back on track, we were talking about how power couldn't actually be measured, but we were talking about the respect for a police officer versus a security guard. And I was saying that there's a difference between a respect for a role and a respect for a person. So I would have more respect for someone and be more inclined to do something for someone who seemed like a decent human being, but I would have more fear for, say, a police officer than a security guard. Where were we from there?
I was about to say neither are to be respected, but okay. Yeah. Shit. It appears that my power to adequately record this stream has severely diminished after this.
But we still have the power to get people to hear our voices.
Luckily, yes. At least a part of our vanity remains.
We just may have lost the authority to get them to want to.
If Dave keeps doing that, they might never check in again. Although if the stream's frozen, they don't know what Dave just did.
Nobody can see it. Yeah.
In which case, does that mean I can get naked? Because I'm boiling right now.
I thought you already wore.
Only if people subscribe to the Patreon.
Okay. I've got to save that
This
for
is
our
extras.
Patreon-only streams, right? Okay, that's fine. Like that
Yes,
time Kate
but-
walked in.
But donate 1,000 to stop him, just through PayPal or some shit.
Yeah. To be fair, there is a donate link on the answersinreason.com site. If anyone or collectively donate within the next 48 hours £1,000, I will promise not to get naked on camera.
That you have the power.
And you will have some authority over us if you do.
Brilliant. So yeah, back to my previous question. Where were we?
Well, basically done with the introductory, the scripted part. That's done.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So
That was 3 days of work in like 30 minutes. That's pretty fucking sour, to be honest.
So what we've got there is we've got a good introduction to power that is going to be basically the first chapter of the podcast. So what we have done in previous podcasts is sometimes we've done an epically long podcast that's taken sort of 2-3 hours that we have chopped down to the core bits, but you still got a 2-hour long podcast. But on the other hand, we also have chaptered podcasts. So we did 2 of these in season 2. One where we discussed morality and what is morality and various moral theories. And that started with an overarching discussion of what morality was, like we've done tonight with what power is. And then we had a bit of a discussion about its purpose. Then we went into various moral theories. So tonight we have done the basics of what is power. So it goes over to the questions of anyone that's live streaming now, if they've got any questions, or if they've got questions for us next time, bring them in. It'd be brilliant. But also, Chris, Dave, and Andy, if you've got any questions for Martin, it's your opportunity to ask them now as well.
No, I'm good. I'll wait until we go deeper into discussions about power.
So, what would you like us to cover off in our next sort of topic about power?
He-Man.
Who, me?
Yeah, you.
Oh, well, I suppose we could do deeper into the Arendt version of power, or Stephen Luke's 3 Dimensions of Power. There's also more discussion about Robert Dahl's idea that power is confrontational. And there's the Bacharach's 2 Dimensions of Power. But there's quite a few theories of power that could be gone into. But it's Martin's episode, so it's really up to him.
And
At some point,
Go
we
for it.
also need to cover the common phrase of power corrupts and see whether we think that that's a valid and true statement.
I think we could probably all cover that one right now. I think we'd probably be in agreement as well, even without even saying what we think. But if you want to save that for an episode at the end, maybe, then that's fine. What about you, Andy?
No, there's nothing specific that I'd go into.
Well, awesome. It looks like we are at the end of the first chapter of the Fresh Air podcast on power. Depending on how this actually turned out and recorded, etc., depends on if we will be doing more live streams or if we'll go back to our previous methodology without having the video streams. So if you want to catch them, they're on answersinreason.com and Spotify and all of that. If you go to answersinreason.com, there's a link to our podcast, and you can just go there and subscribe, and it should be able to give you a link to iTunes, Spotify, Google Cast, etc. That's where all of our audio podcasts are going. I still haven't finished producing the end of season 2, even though we are halfway through season 3. It takes a lot of time and production. So this was our first test to see if we could do it 1 live, 2 doing it all in one audio file rather than separate audio files, because usually I take everybody's individual audio files and I do a lot of editing on them before we even release our unedited version, and by that I mean I clean up the audio, I get them all sort of sounding at the right level. So hopefully tonight has been all right. If any of you out there who have listened to the podcast, especially more recent episodes, and have seen us tonight, we'd love a bit of feedback on what you thought about the quality variance between the live stream and the podcast. If you felt it was forgivable or not. We do look forward to doing more live stuff in the future. We obviously do the Fresh Air SciPhi broadcast, which is much more short, snappy episodes, which is we jump on and we discuss something a bit more current than these larger topics that we plan to discuss. It's suddenly the right way around. How did you do that, Chris?
Let me guess. He drew on the back of the paper.
Shut up, Andy.
Well done.
Yes,
well
I
done.
did.
I mean, he skillfully wrote it backwards in block letters.
Don't forget as well, this Saturday we are doing a very rare thing of the SciPhi, because we wouldn't usually be recording, but we've got Tim O'Neill from History for Atheists joining us. He is he runs his own site. He gets a lot of flack from other atheists because he is a bit of a history buff, and he points out errors that are common atheist catchphrases that we might often hear people say. For example, the whole Ishtar thing being Easter, or the general Jesus mythicism and other things like that. So he would.
One that fucking hates Richard Carrier.
He is, yeah, he is. So it's going to be an interesting episode. We'd love people to be there in the chat room to ask questions to him. Get them in advance as well. Essentially, it's going to be about 8 p.m. GMT on Saturday, which is going to be the morning for him because he's actually he lives in Sydney. Which is why we're doing a weekend episode, because there was no way we could get something there. We wouldn't usually do something at the weekend. Usually I'd be trying to do something with the family, as I'm sure many of you would. But if you are in on Saturday night, or if you're on the other side of the world, you're bored Sunday morning, then please join us. Please ask questions. Send them through, even if you send them to admin@answers-in-reason.com for Tim O'Neill on Saturday. We'd love as many different questions. If you haven't got any idea who he is, check out the blog History for Atheists. Literally just type that into Google and it will come up with it. I don't know if you guys have had much experience with any of his articles yourselves.
I've had a brief look through his site, but not in any real depth.
Yeah, I've just read one or two.
Yeah, so I mean, I've read a couple myself. It's interesting the way he lays things out. It's a very different look on things from the standard atheist rhetoric. We're all atheists ourselves, and there are probably some things that we think are true that maybe he will say, well, actually, no, that's a bit of bullshit because of X, Y, Z. And it's always good to have a look at different opinions on things. And you may still at the end of it disagree with him, or you may be like, oh, actually, maybe I do need to look into this more. Maybe I shouldn't just listen to the same circles who are just telling me the same shit over and over and over again. It's the same sort of thing that we find with a lot of the philosophical concepts that we discuss. You consider morality and things like that, knowledge and beliefs. You hear so many common catchphrases with them from people who haven't spent much time actually looking into the topic. They've just heard other things from other people, or just had thoughts in their head based on things and stuff, rather than delving deep into the topics. And I think that can be the same for a lot of the historical stuff as well. So it'd be nice to change our pace, move away from all the philosophy that we're doing, and discuss history for a little bit. So if you're up for that, join us on Saturday.
I've definitely got a question for him.
R. Rock's atheist.
I've had enough of that one. I've settled it once and for all. Some of you won't necessarily get that quote, but it's very relevant to that discussion. What was your question?
I didn't, and I don't care.
Richard Carrier has put out something fairly recently that I haven't had a chance to read yet, but saw come up on Facebook about how historical Gnosticism isn't really a thing.
How does he know that?
Historical knowledge isn't a thing, so you can't have any knowledge over history.
No,
is that what you're saying?
As in the Gnostic position, as it's looked at with historical context, isn't actually what people think it is.
So when you say Gnostic, are you talking about the Christians who were the Gnostics, or are we talking past
the
each other here?
Christians? Yeah, I believe.
Okay, so the Gnostics were people who, I mean, this is what I understand of history. The Gnostics were a sect of Christians that thought they had the special knowledge of God. And you're saying Richard
Ooh,
Carrier
like
says
me.
You're saying Richard Carrier has released something that says that this is not true. Is that what you're saying, Chris?
Just looked it up. RichardCarrier.info has an article released on the 31st of August this year entitled Gnosticism Didn't Exist.
Interesting. Okay. Well, that'd be something interesting to bring up with him, definitely. Maybe we'll take that offline. If you guys have